Hi, I'm Paul Darkroom, an independent audio designer and composer based in Scotland. SnapHunt is a game I'm working on audio for as part of Darkroom Interactive, a startup games development company begun during my time at Abertay University, where I've just graduated from with a Masters in Professional Games Development. The game is an asymmetrical online multiplayer where four camera-toting conspirators set out to photograph a dangerous mythological creature controlled by a fifth player. SnapHunt is set in the late 70s and draws from many characteristics of that era, from the analog technology to the films of directors such as John Carpenter and Sam Raimi. We wanted to capture that throwback retro conspiracy culture, which surrounded such events as the Roswell incident and particularly the Bigfoot phenomenon, while adding some dramatic flair inspired by films like The Evil Dead. The fundamental rule of the game world is that if you truly believe something is real, you will find it, which in this case is driving the increasing numbers of sightings of mythological creatures and paranormal phenomena, as more and more people begin to question what exactly makes up their reality. We recently showcased our first vertical slice of the gameplay at EGX with Transfuser and had a terrific response. Now, as a sort of review and recap of the project up to this point, I'm putting together a 3-part vlog series where I break down the audio components of the game. This is part 1, the environments. The gameplay prototype is set in Algonquin National Park in Ontario, Canada. The networked gameplay, built in Unreal Engine, was simplified down to just a single-player experience where you face off against an AI-controlled Wendigo of Native American folklore, armed only with a vintage SLR and many rolls of 35mm film. The game has 2 primary stages. Stage 1 is more explorative with a less aggressive monster. However, after the player captures enough evidence of its existence, the fog rolls in and the monster will begin to actively hunt down the player. I wanted the audio to be highly reactive, driven by the player's actions, and impactful enough to elevate the game feel, particularly with regards to the camera. To do this, I broke down the 3 primary components of the audio design: environmental sound effects, character foley, and music. I assigned each one a small number of master parameters, which could be used to rapidly change its character, depending on player input. All audio implementation was done in Wise, with additional blueprints created in Unreal Engine for specific elements and behaviours. The game runs over a dedicated server, and so networked audio was a major concern. However, for the environment at least, most emitters are global and triggered by the server when the game begins, negating the need for extra micromanagement of whether to play them back on only one specific client or not. I started with the environment as it would provide a backdrop for the rest of the gameplay. I wanted to create a very detailed and generally realistic environment to help sell the reality of the world, allowing me a little more creative license when it came to exaggerating certain aspects of it, ideally while retaining a certain level of immersion. In this case, the master parameters are a combination of the wind speed and distance from the monster, supported by state changes such as the game stage and where the player is in relation to the monster. To streamline the Wise project hierarchy and ensure it remained cohesive and easy to debug, I created a detailed behavior tree using Draw.io, which allowed me to plan out all the routings and required assets ahead of time. This inevitably changed, obviously, during development, but it provided a great starting point and forced me to think about any aspects I may have overlooked otherwise, in the slapdash spirit of the moment. For the vertical slice that we demoed, there were 3 different tree densities, each with their own 2D atmosphere, of which there were several random variations. This provided a base over which to place emitters to add extra interest. As the player moves around the map, entering the various collision zones triggers a state change to a different density. These states have effects across the whole mix. For instance, in dense trees the wind level is reduced considerably. Various emitters for tree details, like leaves falling, insect sounds, birds, water features and more, were spatialized in 3D using the Reflect plugin in Wise. This added an enhanced sense of space and provided the player with some more information to help them navigate the forest, which was quite dense. These ambient sound effects were arranged within various switch and blend containers. The forest sounds very different in Stage 2 compared to Stage 1. For instance, the wind drops off in Stage 2, and daytime birds are replaced by nocturnal ones, such as owls. I was careful as much as possible to only include sounds that could exist within the Canadian climate, or a similar longitude. These ambient sounds are also affected by the player's distance to the monster. Inside the creature's sphere of influence, a random state is chosen within a categorized list of master states. These states would generally adjust mix volumes of various buses, such as the birds, which may become silent as the monster draws near. In all this, I was thinking about how to provide the player with subtle information that could inform their choices or even add a layer of tension. The distance to monster parameter was assigned an RTPC value in Wise and could utilize the blend containers for interesting results. For example, the insects can transition into chirping in reverse or 2D when the monster draws close, giving the environment a slightly more surreal quality. For a final release, I'll be upgrading the Wise integration from 2017 2.5 to at least 2018 1.2, which allows for more streamlined blending of 2D, 3D sound sources. Another master RTPC parameter governing the environment was wind speed, which would raise and lower the volume of emitters like rustling bushes and increase the trigger rate of randomized leaves swirling. All environmental sounds were passed through a subset of convolution reverb buses using spatial audio volumes in Unreal, which applied a certain type of reverb depending on the current tree density and the player's location on the map. By the waterside, for example, there is a distinctly long reverb created by the sound bouncing off the lake's surface and distant mountains. In total, there were 7 convolutions used for various settings, although they were not all active at once to reduce their impact on performance. There were also special emitters attached to specific blueprint actors in the level, such as ferns and twiggy bushes. These have a simple collision volume around the mesh, which detects collisions with the player and plays back a short sound over the ambient looping sound effects as the player brushes past. The volume and low pass filter on this are affected by the player's speed, another master parameter, which modulated most of the Foley sounds. I felt it was important to include these details to make the forest feel more alive and interactable. The major downside to this was a large number of voices being played back at any one time from various emitters, which was compounded by the use of multiple blueprints, which are not optimal in terms of performance. I also implemented a dynamic wind system, creating a blueprint on the player character which took the relative rotation in world space, converted it to a float value, and used this to filter and pan a 2D wind emitter, so as the player looks around, they can hear the subtle differences in wind level we normally experience. For instance, when facing towards a wind source, it's a lot more blustery than when side on and to a lesser extent behind you. It was a subtle addition, but I feel it adds another layer of realism to exploration. In terms of optimization, I made heavy use of Wise's virtual voice feature, allowing me to apply distance culling to sounds that were attenuated below -60 dB. Before optimization, there were almost 200 ambient voices at any one time when I initially profiled the project in Wise, which is far too high and could cause performance issues, even before the rest of the sounds were taken into account. Some sounds also had a higher priority than others. For instance, the river had to be audible from further away than some twigs rustling. By assigning these priorities and doing some additional voice limiting, I was able to reduce the emitters any one time down to around 30, which remains sufficiently dense without sacrificing too much performance. This also brought the average audio CPU load for the environmental assets down to a safe 15%. So that's part 1, basically a summary of my approach to the environmental audio design and implementation for SnapHunt. I hope it wasn't too long. I'll follow up soon with part 2, which will cover Foley. If you have any thoughts or constructive criticisms, I'd love to hear them, so please feel free to get in touch at contact@imtethered.net. Cheers!